Chapter 1. The Whispering Begins. In the quiet village of Elmswith, the early morning mist clung to the hedgerows and the stone paths winding through neat gardens, casting everything in a soft, ethereal gray. The sun had barely risen, but the village was already stirring with the usual sounds: the clatter of milk bottles, the chirping of birds, the low hum of distant voices preparing for the day. Yet, in one particular corner of the village, an ancient, ivy-clad manor at the edge of town, the normal rhythms of morning were interrupted by an unusual sound, a faint, almost imperceptible whispering that seemed to emanate from the old chimney. Miss Marple, who had come to visit for her usual morning walk and perhaps a quiet cup of tea, paused at the garden gate, her keen eyes narrowing slightly as she listened. The whispering was soft, uneven, as though the wind had taken a human shape for a moment, murmuring secrets meant only for the walls themselves. The house had always been considered peculiar by the villagers, its windows shuttered, its roof sagging slightly in the center, and the chimney, which had stood tall and proud for centuries, now appearing almost alive with its strange sounds. Curiosity and a hint of foreboding tugged at Miss Marple's mind. She knew the weight of silence often hid far more than noise ever could. As she approached the manor path, the air seemed to thicken, carrying with it the faint scent of old wood, soot, and the lingering memory of smoke long extinguished. The whispering grew a fraction louder as she neared the door, almost as if guiding her attention to the very heart of the house. Meanwhile, in the village, the usual morning chatter began to turn into speculation. Mrs. Pennington, perched by the window of the Rosehill Tea Rooms, peered out and remarked to her friend Mrs. Finch, "Have you heard the manor this morning? That chimney, it's as if it's speaking." Mrs. Finch, ever practical, dismissed the notion with a small shake of her head, yet even she felt a shiver pass over her as the wind carried a barely audible murmur across the garden walls. Miss Marple, meanwhile, noted every detail: the shift in the leaves, the subtle creak of old timbers, the way the air seemed to move differently around the chimney. She understood that the village's gossip might exaggerate, but exaggeration often began with truth, and the truth was waiting somewhere in the manor, behind doors locked for decades and secrets carefully concealed by generations of careful hands. As she reached the doorstep, she paused again, sensing the stillness of the house, the kind of stillness that preceded discovery, and prepared herself for the investigation to come, aware that in the silence of the whispering chimney, the first threads of a complex mystery were already beginning to unravel. Chapter 2. Murmurs in the Manor. Inside the manor, the whispering persisted, faint but persistent, curling through the old corridors like a secret seeking a listener, and Miss Marple, having entered through the slightly ajar front door, allowed herself a slow, measured survey of the grand hallway, noting the faded wallpaper, the worn Persian runner along the floor, the way the heavy curtains blocked the morning light in uneven folds, and every subtle creak beneath her shoes told a story of years, of footsteps long gone, of lives lived and secrets buried, while the whispering seemed to change as she moved, sometimes soft, almost like breath over a keyhole, sometimes sharper, like the rustle of paper or the shifting of a loose brick, yet always deliberate, drawing her attention to areas that otherwise appeared unremarkable, and she made careful notes in her mind, cataloging the pattern of sound, the way it echoed differently against various walls, the slight drafts coming through tiny gaps around the windows, all of which might serve as clues or as distractions, for she knew well that houses, particularly old houses, could play tricks on the senses, and that even an innocent sound could be manipulated by a clever hand. As she moved past the grand staircase, where polished banisters reflected dim light, showing streaks of age and fingerprints from previous visitors long forgotten, the whispering seeming to resonate from the chimney at the far end of the corridor, an area of the manor that had been closed off for decades, and as Miss Marple approached, she noticed subtle signs of disturbance: a layer of dust slightly shifted, small footprints pressed into the carpet fibers, the faintest indentation along the edge of a rug, perhaps caused by something heavy moved recently, and she crouched, examining the fibers, the marks, noting the angles and pressure. knowing that even the smallest sign might indicate someone had been there recently, while outside, in the quiet village, Mrs. Pennington and Mrs. Finch continued to speculate over tea, words tumbling over one another as they shared stories of strange noises, unexplained movements, and the eerie reputation of the whispering chimney. And although most of their conversation was embellishment, the kernel of truth, the house itself, the chimney, the whispers, was the foundation upon which Miss Marple would build her understanding, noticing how human perception, emotion, and imagination interacted with the tangible world. And as she rose and continued along the corridor, the faint odor of smoke, slightly acrid and lingering, met her senses, a subtle trace from long ago perhaps, or a more recent fire, hidden in a hearth now cold, and each detail, scent, sound, and subtle displacement of objects contributed to her growing map of the house, while she reflected on the way human nature often left clues in the smallest gestures, in the placement of objects, in the subtle deformation of materials over time. And she noted a slightly loose brick in the fireplace, a small crack running along the mantelpiece, and the way the light played across an old painting on the wall, creating shadows that seemed almost like fingers pointing toward a hidden corner. And she thought of the villagers, how their whispered stories might hold truth, how fear and imagination could distort fact but also reveal the very things they were trying to hide. And so she allowed herself a slow, deliberate pace, moving from room to room, hall to hall, corridor to corridor, cataloging, observing, listening, and reflecting, understanding that patience, attention, and the smallest detail could unlock decades of mystery. And as she approached the hearth, a faint draft seemed to shift the whispering, almost as if the house itself acknowledged her presence, guiding her attention toward the chimney, toward the core of the manor's secrets. While outside, the day brightened, the mist lifting from the hedgerows, villagers beginning to carry on with routine tasks, unaware of the unfolding events within the manor, and Miss Marple, poised, serene, and meticulous, prepared to unravel the first tangible threads of the mystery, knowing that patience and careful observation would allow her to uncover the true nature of the whispering chimney. As the faint, persistent murmur seemed to grow in resonance, almost forming words in the echo of the empty rooms, urging her forward toward a revelation that had remained hidden for far too long. Chapter 3: Secrets in the Shadows. Miss Marple paused in the manor's library, a room that seemed to breathe its history in every shadow and every faint creak of the floorboards, the towering shelves crowded with leather-bound volumes whose spines had faded to soft browns and golds. And as she moved along the narrow aisle between them, she noticed small details that others might dismiss: a slightly ajar book hiding a scrap of paper, the faint imprint of a letter previously pressed between two volumes, the dust unevenly disturbed, as though someone had brushed past recently, all subtle signs of activity that spoke louder than any conversation, while the whispering from the chimney above seemed to shift, more insistent now, echoing through the rafters in a way that suggested a rhythm, a pattern, almost like a heartbeat of the manor itself. And she traced the sound to the far corner, where an old globe and a display of heirlooms sat beneath a tall window, sunlight filtering through the glass in fragmented beams that illuminated motes of dust swirling in the still air, creating an almost otherworldly glow around the objects, each telling a story, each holding fragments of human history, careful concealments, and hidden intentions. And as she examined them, she discovered small, deliberate scratches on the surface of the desk, a faded wax seal still clinging to the edge of a folded letter, and a photograph that had been tucked behind the frame of a painting, its edges curled with age, capturing a moment long forgotten yet full of significance to the narrative that had quietly persisted in the manor. While outside, the village continued in ordinary rhythm, unaware that every whispered rumor, every speculation, and every exaggerated tale now had roots in truths she was beginning to uncover. And Miss Marple, ever observant, noted how human behavior left traces in the most subtle of ways. From the alignment of furniture to the minutiae of paper folds, from the careful placement of heirlooms to the choices made in lighting, ventilation, and preservation of objects, each a potential signal, a deliberate or unconscious message that when combined with patience and keen observation could reveal entire narratives. And as she moved toward a tall cabinet against the wall, she discovered a small, almost invisible latch concealed in a carved flourish of wood, and pressing it revealed a hidden compartment within which lay a bundle of letters, a tiny key, and a folded note written in a hand both familiar and deliberate, the ink faded but readable, each word echoing the concerns, fears, and intentions of someone who had once walked these halls and now left behind only traces for a perceptive mind to decode. And Miss Marple, calm and methodical, began to sort through them, carefully unfolding each piece, reading, noting, and mentally mapping the connections between names, dates, and events, while the whispering from the chimney seemed to swell in response to her presence, almost as if the house itself approved of the careful attention being paid to its long-hidden secrets, and the subtle interplay between sound, shadow, and object became a puzzle she methodically unraveled, realizing that every creak, every uneven layer of dust, and every disturbance of light might indicate both the past actions of those long gone and the movements of anyone who might still walk these halls unnoticed. While she cross-referenced each clue with the faint inscriptions, the marginal notes on the letters, and the delicate arrangements of heirlooms, slowly uncovering a narrative of concealed rivalries, secret alliances, and hidden inheritances, a tapestry woven by generations of careful hands, each decision echoing across time. And as she laid out the evidence on the long library table, sunlight striking the polished surface, she noticed a subtle draft from the fireplace, the whispering becoming almost coherent, guiding her attention to a concealed section of the chimney breast, where a small panel was barely visible in the intricate masonry, and upon examining it, she discovered a hidden niche containing a delicate, dust-covered locket and a folded piece of parchment with cryptic symbols, each suggesting a secret communication, a deliberately obscured message meant for someone who could decipher it. And as she pieced together the connections between the letters, the photographs, the locket, and the faint whispers of the chimney, she began to see the outlines of a larger mystery, one that tied the manor's past to present events, and which required patience, intuition, and a meticulous attention to human behavior to unravel. While the manor itself seemed to respond, the air thickening with anticipation, shadows stretching as though drawing attention to particular areas, the very structure of the house conspiring to reveal its long-held secrets to the careful, perceptive observer. And Miss Marple, standing amidst the evidence, realized that the whispers were not merely sounds but signals, markers, and hints, each one a deliberate part of the intricate puzzle that, when finally decoded, would illuminate the true story behind the whispering chimney, its concealed heirlooms, the hidden correspondences, and the motives that had driven generations of residents to act in secrecy, while outside, the village remained unaware, the sounds of daily life continuing unabated, as if time itself had granted the manor a space outside ordinary reality, a space in which truths, long concealed, were patiently awaiting discovery by the most perceptive mind. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Past. Miss Marple moved deeper into the manor, following the faint trail of whispers that seemed to weave around the corners of every room and linger in the shadows, guiding her as if the house itself were offering silent hints to those patient enough to listen. And as she entered the grand dining hall, the air felt heavier, filled with the faint scent of aged wood, wax polish, and something indefinably old. The lingering aroma of meals prepared long ago, traces of family gatherings and moments frozen in time that spoke louder than words, while the high ceilings and intricate moldings cast elongated shadows across the parquet floors, the flickering light from a distant fireplace painting the walls with moving silhouettes that seemed almost alive. And Miss Marple paused, noticing subtle anomalies, the slight misalignment of a chair, the faint indentation of a carpet where a foot might have pressed, the whisper of a breeze through a barely closed window, each detail carefully catalogued. In her mind, forming a web of evidence that was invisible to the untrained eye, and as she circled the room, she discovered a faint trail of soot dust along the fireplace mantel, almost imperceptible but revealing that someone had recently tampered with the chimney, perhaps to hide a secret or access the hidden chamber she had begun to suspect existed, while outside, the village was alive with morning chatter. The distant clatter of carts and footsteps masking the quiet drama unfolding within. The manor, though Miss Marple knew well that human activity, no matter how ordinary it seemed, often left traces, and subtle interactions between objects and people could uncover entire narratives of secrecy and deception, and in the corner of the room, partially obscured by heavy drapes, a faint outline of a hidden panel caught her eye, its edges slightly uneven against the wall, suggesting recent movement or interference. And as she approached, the whispering intensified, almost as if the chimney above acknowledged her recognition of its secrets, and Miss Marple, calm, meticulous, and unhurried, began to examine the panel, feeling for locks, hinges, and any clue that might reveal what had been concealed within, while her mind raced through the possibilities. Old family rivalries, hidden correspondences, illicit exchanges of objects or information, and the long-standing mysteries that had been whispered among villagers in hushed tones, half-believed stories that now, under her careful scrutiny, began to take tangible form, and when she gently pressed against the panel, a soft click revealed a narrow recess, inside which lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, a small key encrusted with dust, and an intricately carved heirloom that seemed to radiate importance despite its small size, each object a potential clue to motives, actions, and secrets carefully guarded over the years. And as she examined the letters, she noted delicate handwriting, faint smudges of ink, and marginal annotations that hinted at urgency, secrecy, and perhaps fear, while the heirloom itself, a delicate miniature, suggested lineage, inheritance, and concealed connections between the manor's past and the present. And as she studied these items, the whispering in the chimney shifted again, almost forming a rhythm, a sequence that Miss Marple, with her quiet intelligence, recognized as deliberate, a pattern to be interpreted in conjunction with the physical evidence she had gathered, and she began to cross-reference the letters with the objects in the room, the photographs, the furniture placement, the subtle disturbances in dust layers, and the light patterns across the walls, to construct a narrative that linked the manor's history to current events, revealing tensions, unspoken rivalries, and secrets that generations of inhabitants had attempted to conceal, while outside, the villagers speculated about the manor as always, weaving stories and gossip that were only partially true, yet sometimes, in the distortion of rumor, lay fragments of fact that Miss Marple would use to her advantage, understanding how human nature, with its tendencies toward exaggeration and embellishment, often left traces of hidden truth, and so she moved methodically from corner to corner, cataloging, observing, and reflecting, the whispering continuing as a subtle guide, until she found a faint inscription along the fireplace bricks, partially covered by soot, suggesting a hidden message or marker left by someone aware of the secret compartment above, and as she deciphered it, she realized that the manor itself, with its whispering chimney, hidden panels, aged letters, and carefully placed heirlooms, was speaking to her in a language of shadows, sound, and subtle signs, guiding her toward the core of the mystery, a truth long concealed, awaiting discovery, and Miss Marple, poised and patient, knew that each moment of observation, each detail noted and analyzed, brought her closer to understanding the full story of the whispering chimney, its hidden compartments, its heirlooms, and the motives that had shaped decades of secrecy. As the mansion seemed to hold its breath, the silence punctuated only by faint whispers, distant echoes, and the soft creaking of old timbers, creating an atmosphere of suspense, anticipation, and revelation that would slowly unravel under her careful, intelligent scrutiny. Chapter 5: Shadows Among the Portraits. Miss Marple lingered in the long corridor leading from the dining hall to the upper rooms of the manor, her eyes tracing the faded portraits lining the walls, each painting capturing a moment in time, a family member or visitor whose gaze now seemed almost alive in the dim light, and as she passed, the whispering from the chimney above grew faintly louder, almost beckoning her toward the largest portrait at the far end. an imposing figure of a stern-looking gentleman whose eyes seemed to follow her every step, while the polished wooden floor reflected shards of sunlight from the tall, narrow windows, illuminating small imperfections, scratches, and scuffs that hinted at countless footsteps over decades, evidence of lives lived and secrets kept. And as she neared the end of the corridor, Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the base of the portrait, where the frame rested slightly askew, a barely perceptible gap revealing the edge of a small panel embedded in the wall behind, and her curiosity was piqued, for the subtle misalignment suggested that it had been moved recently, perhaps by someone who knew its contents or by an unknowing hand, while the whispering from the chimney seemed to respond, a soft, rhythmic susurration that she had begun to recognize as a signal, a clue hidden in sound, guiding her investigation. And as she carefully adjusted the frame, the panels swung open on small, well-oiled hinges, revealing a narrow recess within the wall, inside which lay an assortment of objects, faded letters bound with brittle ribbons, a small tarnished key, and a delicate locket engraved with initials worn by time, each item carrying the weight of the manor's history, secrets carefully guarded, and intentions carefully concealed, while the air was heavy with the scent of aged paper, polished wood, and faint traces of smoke, a reminder that the fireplace above had witnessed more than its share of whispers, conversations, and clandestine actions. And as Miss Marple gently lifted the letters and unwrapped the ribbons, she noted delicate handwriting, tiny smudges of ink, and marginal notes that hinted at urgency, secrecy, and perhaps fear, each word a fragment of a story waiting to be pieced together. And as she studied the locket, she discovered that it contained a miniature portrait of a young woman whose eyes, though painted decades earlier, seemed to reflect the same quiet intelligence and subtle determination she herself possessed, a connection across time that whispered of love, rivalry, and hidden motives. And as she examined the key, she realized it was meant for a lock that had yet to be discovered, a physical representation of access, control, and concealment, while the whispering from the chimney shifted again, as if approving her careful attention, each soft murmur acting as a thread leading her through the tangled web of the manor's mysteries. And Miss Marple, calm and methodical, began to consider how these objects connected. The letters to past inhabitants, the locket to a personal attachment, the key to a secret compartment or hidden room, each piece fitting into the broader puzzle of the whispering chimney, the quiet signals of the manor guiding her toward revelations that had remained hidden for decades, while outside, the village carried on with ordinary sounds, unaware of the intricate dance of observation, deduction, and discovery unfolding within the manor. And she reflected on the nature of human secrecy, how intentions, emotions, and relationships could be traced through the smallest signs, the subtlest gestures, and how patience, careful observation, and an understanding of human behavior allowed truths to emerge from the shadows. And as she arranged the letters on the table beneath the portrait, carefully examining the dates, signatures, and messages, she began to form hypotheses about the relationships between past and present residents, the potential motives that might have influenced their actions, and the way long-held secrets could reverberate across generations. While the whispering continued, an ever-present companion in her methodical investigation, guiding her through corridors, rooms, and hidden niches, ensuring that each discovery led naturally to the next. And Miss Marple, poised and observant, felt the full weight of the manor's history, the intertwining of human lives, the careful concealment of critical evidence, and the subtle hints left in sound, light, and dust. Knowing that the unraveling of the whispering chimney's secrets required both intellect and intuition, and as she pieced together the connections between the letters, the locket, the key, and the faint signals from the chimney, she began to see the outline of a larger story, a narrative of hidden rivalries, concealed communications, and carefully guarded heirlooms, waiting for a perceptive mind to decode. While the shadows along the corridor lengthened, stretching over the polished floors, merging with the whispering to create an atmosphere thick with anticipation, suspense, and quiet revelation, a prelude to the truths that would slowly emerge under Miss Marple's careful, intelligent scrutiny. Each whisper, each shadow, each object a crucial element in the unfolding mystery of the whispering chimney, patiently waiting for the right mind to connect them all. Chapter 6: The Hidden Correspondence. Miss Marple carefully left the corridor and entered the small study at the back of the manor, a room that exuded a sense of deliberate privacy, the heavy drapes drawn to mute the daylight and the furniture arranged in a way that suggested order and secrecy, and immediately her eyes were drawn to a large oak desk, its surface polished but scarred with the indentations of countless letters, ledgers, and documents, while the whispering from the chimney above seemed to drift downward, faint yet insistent, guiding her attention to subtle irregularities in the room's arrangement, and as she approached the desk, she noticed a stack of papers that had been shifted recently, their edges uneven, a small gap between them revealing the corner of a folded letter, the envelope sealed with a wax insignia that had softened with age but still bore a distinctive crest, hinting at correspondence of significance, possibly private instructions, confidential observations, or secret communications meant to be discovered only by a select few, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, delicately lifted the letter, noting the careful script, the faded ink, the slight smudge in one corner suggesting hurried handling or anxiety, while around her, the study seemed to hold its breath, the faint whispering accentuating the sense of anticipation, as if the house itself recognized her capacity to unravel its mysteries. And as she carefully opened the envelope, she found multiple sheets of paper, each filled with observations, names, dates, and cryptic instructions, a network of secrets spanning years, tied to the manor's history, its inhabitants, and the hidden movements within the whispering chimney, while her mind mapped the connections, linking each note to the objects she had already discovered, the locket in the hidden recess, the letters behind the portrait, and the subtle hints left in shadows, light, and dust, revealing a pattern that only a patient, attentive observer could decode. And as she read, she realized that the correspondence contained instructions regarding the concealment of important documents and heirlooms, directions for accessing hidden compartments, and even veiled warnings about certain individuals, a careful orchestration of secrecy designed to preserve family reputation, manipulate inheritance, and control access to knowledge, while outside the manor, the village went about its ordinary routines, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding within the walls. The whispers, the letters, the subtle disturbances in objects and dust, all of which formed an intricate puzzle that Miss Marple was now slowly piecing together, and she noted how human behavior, in its desire for control, secrecy, or protection, often left clues, from the placement of a letter to the slight misalignment of a desk drawer, from the choice of wax seal to the direction of handwriting, each an indicator of intention, emotion, or fear, and as she cross-referenced the correspondence with her observations in the other rooms, she began to see the outlines of hidden rivalries, secret alliances, and concealed motives, all intertwined with the whispering chimney, the manor's architecture, and the careful placement of heirlooms, letters, and objects over decades, while the whispering shifted again, almost forming a rhythm, a subtle sequence that Miss Marple recognized as a guide, a set of markers in the language of the house, directing her attention to the next clue, the next hidden compartment, the next revelation waiting to be uncovered, and as she followed this unseen pattern, moving to a tall bookcase along the far wall, she discovered a small keyhole hidden in the carved molding, almost invisible to anyone not attentive to the details, a keyhole that matched the small tarnished key she had found behind the portrait, and as she carefully inserted the key, feeling the mechanism click and turn, the bookcase swung open on silent hinges, revealing a narrow chamber, lined with shelves containing ledgers, more letters, and a collection of heirlooms, all meticulously arranged and preserved, the contents of which offered insights into transactions, communications, and events that had been deliberately hidden from casual observers, while the whispering above seemed to grow in resonance, as though pleased with her discovery, accentuating the sense that the manor itself was actively participating in the revelation of its own secrets, and Miss Marple, calm, methodical, and utterly focused, began to catalog the contents of the hidden chamber, linking each object to the corresponding correspondence, noting patterns, anomalies, and discrepancies, gradually constructing a comprehensive understanding of the complex web of secrecy, rivalry, and human emotion that had defined the manor for generations, while outside, the villagers speculated endlessly about the history and reputation of the Whispering Chimney, stories that were half-truths, half-imagination, yet often containing fragments of reality that Miss Marple would incorporate into her careful deductions, and as she worked, she realized that patience, observation, and understanding of human nature were the keys to unlocking the full story, that every whisper, every subtle detail, every shift in dust or light, every seemingly inconsequential object was part of the narrative, a guide leading her to uncover not only the history of the manor but also the motives, intentions, and concealed actions of those who had lived, loved, and schemed within its walls, while the shadows along the corridor lengthened, merging with the whispers to create an atmosphere of suspense, anticipation, and revelation, each subtle movement a clue, each silence pregnant with meaning, and Miss Marple, with her keen intelligence, patient demeanor, and profound understanding of human behavior, knew that the truth of the Whispering Chimney, its hidden compartments, its carefully preserved heirlooms, and the intentions of past and present inhabitants, was slowly revealing itself, one observation at a time, guided by the persistent, rhythmic whispering of the manor that seemed almost like a heartbeat of history itself. Chapter 7. The Murmurs of Evidence. Miss Marple stepped cautiously from the hidden chamber back into the quiet hallway, her mind buzzing with the connections she had already begun to piece together, each letter, locket, and heirloom a thread in the tangled web of the manor's history, and as she moved down the corridor toward the gallery that overlooked the gardens, the whispering from the chimney above seemed to grow stronger, almost insistently drawing her attention to subtle changes in the room's atmosphere. The faint scent of something metallic mingled with aged wood, the shifting of sunlight across the polished floorboards revealing irregularities, the slight movement of dust motes that hinted at recent activity, and as she approached the gallery, she noticed the portraits lining the walls were not merely decorative, but each carefully chosen and positioned, capturing expressions, postures, and gestures that seemed to encode silent messages about alliances, conflicts, and hidden truths, while the delicate glow from the tall windows reflected in the glass-covered frames, creating illusions of movement and shadow that could easily mislead the casual observer, but to Miss Marple suggested intention and history, and at the far end, a small table held a stack of ledgers, the edges frayed and worn, papers sticking out in irregular patterns, as though someone had rifled through them in a hurry or had deliberately left certain items exposed for a specific observer to find, while the whispering from the chimney pulsed faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat, an almost imperceptible guide urging her to inspect the details she might otherwise overlook, and as she carefully leafed through the ledgers, she discovered entries that hinted at concealed transactions, unusual expenditures, and coded notations that suggested communications beyond mere financial records, while alongside the ledgers, she found envelopes sealed with unbroken wax, some bearing insignias of families known in the village, others unmarked but clearly important, and the handwriting, delicate and precise, conveyed urgency, secrecy, and perhaps an element of fear, each stroke of ink revealing emotion and intent that could be interpreted by someone with experience in understanding human behavior, and Miss Marple, calm and methodical, began to cross-reference these notes with the letters and lockets she had discovered earlier, connecting names, dates, and events into a larger pattern, while the whispering above seemed to accentuate her discoveries, almost as if the manor itself approved of her careful attention, guiding her to the next piece of the puzzle, and she noticed a faint indentation along the wall, near the base of the gallery, suggesting that a panel had been opened or tampered with recently, a subtle sign that was easily overlooked but which, when combined with the other clues, hinted at hidden compartments or passages within the manor, and as she knelt to inspect it more closely, she found a small, almost imperceptible latch, cleverly concealed within the carved molding, and upon pressing it, a narrow recess opened to reveal additional correspondence, a tiny key, and an heirloom ring that glinted in the muted light, each object reinforcing her understanding of the manor's carefully guarded secrets, while the whispering continued, almost forming coherent patterns, guiding her thoughts and observations as she catalogued the contents, noting connections between the past and the present, the intentions of the manor's former inhabitants, and the subtle evidence of those who might still move within its walls undetected. And as she placed each item on the table for closer examination, she recognized how human nature often leaves traces, whether in the careful placement of objects, the subtle shifts in dust, the arrangement of letters, or the choice of where to conceal an item. And she realized that the manor's whispering, the subtle clues embedded in shadows, light, and air, were all part of a complex system of signals meant to communicate something to a careful observer, and Miss Marple, with her quiet intelligence and patience, began to interpret these signals, drawing connections that would reveal the story of hidden rivalries, secret alliances, and concealed intentions that had persisted within the manor for decades, while outside, the village remained unaware, going about its daily routines, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding behind the heavy doors and walls, and she understood that the combination of physical evidence, human behavior, and subtle environmental cues was key to uncovering the truth, that every object, every shadow, every whisper mattered in revealing the narrative that had been carefully obscured. And as she carefully documented her findings, she noted how the whispering seemed to interact with her observations, drawing her attention to anomalies, inconsistencies, and hidden markers, guiding her step by step toward the core of the manor's mysteries. And as the afternoon sun slanted through the gallery windows, casting elongated shadows and revealing minute details that had previously escaped notice, Miss Marple felt a growing certainty that she was now close to understanding the full extent of the secrets, the motivations behind the concealments, and the patterns of behavior that had governed the inhabitants of the Whispering Chimney, while the interplay of light, shadow, dust, sound, and carefully preserved objects created an atmosphere thick with anticipation, suspense, and revelation, a living puzzle patiently waiting for a mind like hers to connect all the pieces, and she, ever patient, observant, and insightful, prepared to continue her methodical unraveling of the mysteries that the manor whispered, confident that each clue brought her closer to the truth that had been hidden for so long. Chapter 8. The Garden's Silent Witness. Miss Marple stepped lightly down the narrow staircase, leading from the gallery to the rear gardens, the whispering from the chimney above fading into the distance, but leaving a residual echo in her mind, a subtle rhythm that seemed to linger and direct her thoughts as she entered the open air, where the garden spread out like a carefully curated maze of hedges, flower beds, and winding paths, each turn and intersection offering both beauty and concealment. And as she moved among the clipped topiary and blooms, her eyes noted every subtle irregularity. A stone slightly out of place, a patch of earth that looked recently disturbed, the faint impression of footprints near a fountain partially hidden by trailing ivy, and even the gentle sway of leaves suggesting a breeze that had been diverted or created by movement, all details catalogued silently in her mind, forming a map of activity and potential clues that only someone with patience, observation, and understanding of human nature could interpret, while the manor's walls rose behind her, enclosing the gardens like a protective and secretive shell, as though the house itself had watched over its grounds for generations, guarding the knowledge embedded in every flower, stone, and shadow. And Miss Marple, careful and deliberate, noticed the subtle markings on the fountain's stone basin, faint scratches that suggested the placement of a small object or the recent passage of a hand, while the whispering had left a residue in the air, a kind of memory in sound that her trained mind could interpret, guiding her towards subtle signs others might have overlooked. And as she followed the winding paths, she came upon a secluded bench under a spreading oak, its surface marked with faint carvings and initials, some fresh, some faded by decades, a silent testament to human presence, emotion, and long-past interactions. And she noted how each mark could tell a story, A rivalry, a secret meeting, a hidden grievance, or perhaps an act meant to communicate privately in the absence of witnesses. And near the edge of the garden, partially hidden behind a thick hedge, she discovered a small, weathered shed, its door slightly ajar, hinges creaking faintly in the breeze, revealing a space that seemed almost forgotten, yet its placement and condition suggested deliberate neglect, a space meant to hide things from casual eyes. And as she stepped closer, she noted the scent of old wood, damp earth, and faint traces of soot, implying the occasional presence of a fire, a place where documents, objects, or even conversations might have been concealed, while the whispering in her mind reminded her that these were not random occurrences, but signs of intention and strategy. And as she entered the shed, she discovered a bundle of papers tied together with string, partially damp but legible, and a small box containing a tarnished key and a delicate, folded map of the garden, annotated with faint pencil marks indicating pathways, hidden corners, and perhaps secret access points. And as she studied the papers, she realized they were letters and notes exchanged between past inhabitants, filled with observations, instructions, and coded references that hinted at hidden rivalries, inheritance disputes, and long-standing secrets meant to remain concealed. And the map, though small and simple, contained crucial information: routes that allowed someone to move unseen, corners where one could hide or overhear conversations, and locations of objects or messages left in deliberate concealment. While outside, the sun played over the garden in shifting patterns, shadows lengthening and shortening, highlighting details that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. And Miss Marple, noting the interplay of light, shadow, and hidden space, recognized the deliberate care with which the grounds had been arranged to allow both beauty and secrecy, the dual purpose of decoration and concealment forming an integral part of the manor's mysteries. And as she compared the shed's contents with the letters, locket, key, and hidden compartments she had already uncovered, she began to see the outlines of a coordinated network of concealment and communication, each element placed to preserve secrets, control access, and maintain a legacy of quiet manipulation over generations. While the whispering of the manor seemed to merge with the gentle rustling of leaves, the faint chirping of birds, and the distant hum of village activity, creating a layered symphony of sound that accentuated both suspense and revelation. And Miss Marple, poised, attentive, and patient, began to connect the dots: the shed, the fountain, the bench, the pathways, the letters, the keys, and the locket, all combined into a subtle, intricate story of secrecy, motivation, and human behavior, each small detail contributing to the unfolding mystery, revealing long-held grudges, hidden alliances, and calculated actions that had shaped the history of the Whispering Chimney and its grounds. And as she traced the paths indicated on the map, checking the correspondence with physical evidence in the garden, she realized that the landscape itself, like the manor, acted as a silent witness, preserving evidence in stones, soil, and foliage, waiting for an observant mind to uncover the patterns. And Miss Marple, with her characteristic calm and quiet intelligence, recognized that each clue, each anomaly, each whisper of the past, whether in the letters, the heirlooms, the hidden compartments, or the garden's concealed paths, was part of a larger, deliberate tapestry of mystery, one that she would patiently unravel, guided by intuition, observation, and a profound understanding of human nature, until every secret was revealed, every motive understood, and the full story of the Whispering Chimney's hidden history could finally be told. Chapter 9: Echoes of the Manor. Miss Marple retraced her steps from the secluded garden shed back toward the manor's main wing, her mind meticulously cataloging the objects, letters, and subtle environmental cues she had uncovered, each one a fragment of a story that had remained hidden for decades, while the whispering from the chimney above, faint yet persistent, seemed to follow her, a constant reminder that the house itself was part of the mystery, guiding, hinting, and testing her observations. And as she entered the grand hall, she noticed how the dust settled unevenly on the ornate carpet, faint impressions suggesting recent activity in areas that should have remained untouched, while the polished banister gleamed with reflections of the afternoon sun, drawing her eyes upward toward the staircase, where shadows moved in imperceptible patterns, suggesting passages, hidden alcoves, or moments of observation previously unnoticed. And the portraits that lined the walls seemed almost to pulse with silent stories, each brushstroke, angle, and color subtly encoding emotions, connections, and intentions, the quiet histories of the family and their guests preserved in oil and canvas, as if each painting were a silent witness to actions, secrets, and whispered conversations, and Miss Marple, ever observant, examined each with a patient eye, noting minute details, the tilt of a head, the placement of hands, the slight smudges of varnish, all clues that hinted at personalities, grudges, and long-forgotten disputes, while at her feet, the edge of a rug lifted slightly, exposing a narrow groove in the floorboards, a subtle indicator of a hidden mechanism, and as she pressed her hand against it, a small click confirmed her suspicions. The floor concealed a compartment, possibly used to hide documents, heirlooms, or messages meant for only a select few, and opening it revealed a bundle of papers carefully tied with ribbon, some letters bearing wax seals, others written in delicate handwriting, while a small, tarnished key lay alongside them, its purpose not yet clear but undoubtedly significant, and as she examined the contents, she noticed references to past gatherings, exchanges of property, and mentions of individuals whose names had appeared in other letters, indicating a network of concealed communication that spanned both space and time within the manor, while the whispering from the chimney seemed to swell, as if approving her discoveries, guiding her attention to discrepancies in the handwriting, minor errors in dates, and cryptic phrases that suggested intentional obfuscation, and she realized that these hidden correspondences were carefully designed to protect secrets, mislead casual observers, and maintain control over the flow of information, each piece meticulously crafted to preserve family reputation, manipulate inheritance, or conceal rivalries, and Miss Marple, with her calm, meticulous intelligence, began to cross-reference these findings with the garden map, the shed's letters, the locket, and other heirlooms, slowly constructing a detailed mental map of the manor's hidden activities, the interactions between its inhabitants, and the long-standing patterns of secrecy and observation that defined life within its walls, while outside, the quiet hum of the village belied the complex web of human behavior, hidden intentions, and carefully orchestrated concealment occurring behind the manor's closed doors, and she noted how small details often carried the heaviest weight. The angle of a shadow, the slight misalignment of a frame, a footstep in dust, a whisper on the wind, all of which contributed to understanding the underlying narrative, and as she catalogued these discoveries, she traced connections that suggested rivalries over property, secret alliances forged through letters and meetings, and carefully concealed actions meant to influence the present using knowledge of the past, while the whispering seemed almost like a heartbeat of the manor, a living echo of memory and observation, guiding her focus, accentuating the importance of timing, sequence, and subtle interaction, and she realized that even objects seemingly mundane, a book left slightly askew, a chair out of place, a drawer not quite closed, could contain essential clues about human intention, oversight, or deception. And as she returned to the main staircase to continue her observations, she noticed a small crack in the molding, almost invisible, but enough to suggest the passage of something small yet significant, perhaps a note, key, or other object placed with intent for discovery by someone perceptive, and Miss Marple, recognizing the layers of secrecy embedded in the architecture, environment, and human behavior, methodically traced each anomaly, mapping them against the documents and artifacts she had uncovered, forming a coherent understanding of the hidden network of communications and secrets spanning the whispering chimney, while the afternoon light shifted, highlighting previously unnoticed carvings, dust patterns, and subtle irregularities, all of which reinforced the notion that the manor itself, through careful observation, silence, and whispering, was providing the necessary guidance to uncover the truth, and she knew that each discovery, Each observation and each connection was drawing her closer to understanding the motives, actions, and hidden intentions of those who had lived, loved, and manipulated within the manor for generations. And Miss Marple, patient, intelligent, and quietly relentless, prepared herself to follow the next thread in this intricate tapestry of secrecy, observation, and revelation, confident that the story of the Whispering Chimney would unfold fully under her careful scrutiny. Chapter 10: Shadows Behind the Walls. Miss Marple lingered in the grand hallway for a few moments, her keen eyes scanning the ornate woodwork, the tall windows that cast slanted patterns of light across the polished floors, and the walls lined with portraits whose expressions seemed almost to shift in the changing light, the whispering from the chimney above faintly echoing, as though the house itself were responding to her careful attention. And as she moved toward the west wing, her gaze fell upon a tapestry partially obscuring a side door, the fabric worn and slightly faded, yet showing signs of recent disturbance, a subtle bulge and the faintest trace of dust displaced, suggesting that someone had moved behind it not long ago. And Miss Marple, with her habitual patience, approached, noting the way the edges of the tapestry brushed against the floor, the way the sunlight highlighted minute irregularities. And with gentle fingers, she traced along the hem until she discovered a small slit, nearly invisible, that indicated a hidden passage or compartment, while the whispering from the chimney seemed almost to guide her hand, as if drawing attention to the concealed space. And with careful precision, she pushed aside the tapestry, revealing a narrow doorway hidden behind the fabric, its hinges faintly creaking under the motion, and beyond it, a darkened corridor lined with paneling that bore subtle scratches, indentations, and stains, each telling a story of use, concealment, and intent, while the scent of aged wood, faint dust, and lingering traces of past fires hinted at activities that had remained unseen for decades. And as she stepped carefully into the hidden corridor, her mind catalogued every detail, the way the floorboards groaned underfoot, the alignment of the paneling, the minute variations in the paint and polish, all of which suggested patterns of access, movement, and concealment. And at the far end, a small door appeared almost as part of the wall itself, a keyhole faintly glinting in the filtered light, a lock that matched the tarnished key she had discovered in the hidden garden shed. And with precise care she inserted the key, feeling it turn smoothly, a click confirming her suspicions. And as the door opened, a small chamber revealed itself, containing a collection of letters, documents, and objects arranged with meticulous care, while the whispering seemed to swell slightly, as if acknowledging her discovery and urging her to examine the contents with deliberate attention. And Miss Marple, calm, methodical, and observant, began to sort through the papers, noting dates, signatures, and cryptic instructions, connecting them to previously uncovered letters, the locket, the garden map, and other hidden items, gradually revealing a network of secrecy, alliances, and rivalries spanning generations, while the objects, a small silver brooch, a folded piece of fabric, a journal with faded ink, each provided additional insights into the motivations, intentions, and fears of those who had carefully hidden them. And as she cross-referenced names and events with the manor's history, she noticed patterns emerging, subtle but undeniable. Certain names appearing repeatedly, instructions left vaguely but consistently, objects positioned to communicate silently with a perceptive observer. And she understood that the manor had been meticulously organized to conceal information while simultaneously leaving breadcrumbs for someone attentive and intelligent enough to uncover the truth. And outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, highlighting inconsistencies in dust, reflections in polished surfaces, and slight anomalies in the placement of furniture, all of which Miss Marple noted with precision, aware that human behavior, fear, and pride often left clues embedded in the most mundane details, while the whispering of the chimney, fading now into a softer hum, seemed almost to allow her insights to coalesce, reinforcing the subtle connections she had drawn between letters, objects, rooms, and hidden pathways. And as she carefully documented her observations, noting the discrepancies, anomalies, and patterns, she realized that every hidden compartment, Every concealed document, every seemingly trivial object had been placed with deliberate purpose, reflecting the intentions of those who sought to protect, deceive, or manipulate, and Miss Marple, with her quiet intelligence and profound understanding of human nature, began to formulate the framework of the story. The motives, secrets, and concealed actions that had shaped the Whispering Chimney's past and influenced the present, and as she stepped back to review the chamber, she considered how these discoveries would fit into the larger puzzle of the manor, its gardens, its corridors, and the hidden communications scattered throughout, while simultaneously recognizing that patience, observation, and careful interpretation were essential to uncovering the truth, that each detail, no matter how small, was a vital piece of the narrative, and Miss Marple, poised and meticulous, prepared to follow the next thread in the manor's intricate web of secrets, confident that the whispers, the shadows, and the carefully concealed evidence would continue to guide her toward the full revelation of the mysteries concealed within the walls of the Whispering Chimney. Chapter 11. Secrets in the Study. Miss Marple entered the manor's study with deliberate caution, the heavy door closing softly behind her, the faint scent of old leather, ink, and polished wood filling the room, and immediately her eyes began to trace every detail, from the carefully arranged books on the tall shelves to the slight unevenness of the carpet beneath her feet, each irregularity a potential clue, while the whispering from the chimney, now reduced to a subtle undertone in her mind, seemed to remind her that every object, every placement, and every shadow in the manor might hold significance, and as she moved closer to the large desk at the center of the room, she noticed that the drawers were not quite flush with the frame, one slightly ajar, suggesting recent disturbance, and when she gently pulled it open, she discovered an assortment of letters, journals, and notes, some carefully tied together, others loose, but arranged as if by deliberate hands, each piece of paper a fragment of stories, motives, and secrets that had been carefully hidden from casual observation, while the sunlight filtering through the tall windows cast angular reflections on the polished surface, highlighting slight indentations, smudges, and irregularities in the ink, all of which Miss Marple noted meticulously, recognizing that such subtleties could indicate urgency, concealment, or attempts to communicate without detection. And as she sifted through the correspondence, she noticed names recurring across letters. Subtle references to events, places, and objects that she had already encountered in the garden, the hidden corridor, and the shed, forming a web of connections that, when pieced together, hinted at a network of alliances, rivalries, and concealed intentions within the manor, while on a smaller side table she found a collection of keys, each unique, some worn with frequent use, others pristine as if intended for occasional access, and she carefully matched them to locks she had observed in previous chapters, realizing that certain items were deliberately placed to control access, preserve secrets, or mislead anyone investigating the house, and the whispering in her mind seemed almost to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, drawing her attention to the faint scratch marks along the edges of a drawer, the slight warp in a section of the floor, and the subtle misalignment of books on a shelf, all of which suggested not random activity but careful, intentional actions meant to conceal information, while the letters revealed coded language, faint underlining, and cryptic symbols that Miss Marple interpreted as instructions, warnings, or markers of hidden passages, and as she pieced these together with the objects she had discovered previously, a locket, a map, a tarnished key, she began to see a pattern emerging, a meticulous system of concealment, communication, and influence that spanned decades, shaped by pride, fear, greed, and loyalty, and outside the windows, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the gardens, illuminating angles, corners, and pathways that aligned with the references she had found in her notes, reinforcing the idea that the house, the grounds, and the objects themselves formed an integrated system of storytelling and secrecy, and Miss Marple, calm, patient, and quietly perceptive, documented each observation, correlating names, events, and locations, noting which details suggested deception, which indicated hidden alliances, and which hinted at past grievances or rivalries, and she realized that the manor had been intentionally designed to protect secrets while providing subtle opportunities for a careful observer to uncover them. The placement of furniture, arrangement of objects, and hidden compartments forming a narrative that could be read by someone with insight into human behavior, while the study itself, with its carefully chosen decor, carefully preserved letters and layered clues, acted as a central hub for the flow of information and concealment throughout the house, a place where history, intention, and secrecy intersected, and Miss Marple, aware of the significance, methodically traced the connections between the study, the garden, the hidden corridor, and the shed, aligning objects, notes, and keys to map out the manor's intricate system, understanding that even minor details, like a misplaced book, a faint scent, a scratch in the wood, held weight in revealing truth, and she recognized that uncovering the past actions and intentions of the manor's inhabitants required patience, subtlety, and a deep understanding of human nature, and as she carefully replaced the letters, realigned the drawers, and made mental notes of her discoveries, she felt closer than ever to piecing together the hidden story of the whispering chimney, confident that the combination of environmental clues, human behavior, and carefully preserved objects would ultimately lead her to the revelation of motives, actions, and secrets that had been concealed for generations. While outside, the quiet village continued its routines, unaware of the intricate tapestry of mystery unfolding within the walls of the manor, and Miss Marple, serene and focused, prepared to follow the next thread, knowing that each observation, each connection, each subtle whisper was a step closer to the full understanding of the manor's hidden truths and the silent stories it had preserved for so long. Chapter 12. The Forgotten Attic. Miss Marple ascended the narrow staircase leading to the manor's attic, each step creaking beneath her careful weight, the faint scent of aged timber, dust, and forgotten belongings greeting her as the dim light filtered through a small, grimy window, casting long, irregular shadows across the worn floorboards, while the whispering from the chimney above, subtle yet persistent, seemed to follow her, blending with the soft rustling of moth-eaten curtains and the faint scurrying of unseen creatures. And as she entered the attic proper, her eyes swept over stacks of crates, trunks, and boxes, each layer of storage a potential repository for secrets long hidden, and she observed with meticulous care how the objects were arranged, some deliberately placed for concealment, others left seemingly random but likely containing clues to past events or human behavior, while cobwebs hung in delicate strands from the beams, catching dust and light alike, suggesting that parts of the space had remained untouched for decades, yet faint footprints in the dust revealed that someone had been there recently, moving carefully to avoid detection, and Miss Marple, with her usual calm intelligence, noted the subtle discrepancies in the arrangement of objects, the uneven settling of crates, and the small indentations in the floorboards, all of which hinted at deliberate actions, hidden compartments, or the recent relocation of important items. And among the stacks, she discovered a small, partially open trunk whose lid bore faint scratches and fingerprints, and inside, neatly folded and carefully preserved, were journals, letters, and documents, some bearing wax seals, others with faintly smudged ink, all detailing interactions, grievances, and hidden arrangements among the manor's inhabitants over many years, while a thin layer of dust indicated that the trunk had not been disturbed for some time. But recent movements suggested deliberate inspection by someone aware of its contents, and as she read through the journals, Miss Marple discerned recurring names, cryptic instructions, and references to locations within the manor that she had previously observed, from hidden corridors to the garden shed, each entry adding layers of understanding to the intricate web of secrecy, manipulation, and human behavior that define the whispering chimney. While a faded map tucked between the pages depicted not only the grounds but hidden rooms and passages within the house itself, some of which corresponded to slight irregularities she had noticed in the walls, floors, and staircases, confirming that the manor's architecture had been carefully designed to both conceal and reveal, depending on the observer's knowledge and attention. And outside, the afternoon sun, slipping lower in the sky, cast shifting shadows through the grimy attic window, highlighting textures, dust patterns, and subtle imperfections that drew her focus to previously unnoticed details, while the whispering in her mind suggested that the manor was watching her as much as she was observing it, guiding her attention to objects of significance and areas requiring careful inspection. And in one corner of the attic, partially obscured by a stack of crates, she discovered a small locked box, its surface worn, a delicate engraving hinting at its importance, and with careful attention, she used the tarnished key she had previously found in the garden shed, feeling it fit perfectly. The small click resonating softly in the quiet attic, revealing a collection of delicate items, a locket, several sealed letters, a small notebook, and an assortment of personal effects that spoke of hidden intentions, alliances, and long-standing secrets. And as she examined each piece, she began to see how they connected with the broader patterns she had discovered throughout the manor, from the garden pathways to the hidden corridor, from the study's letters to the attic's forgotten relics. And Miss Marple, with her unparalleled understanding of human nature, recognized that each item represented a deliberate act of concealment, communication, or manipulation, the work of careful planning and psychological insight designed to protect secrets while subtly guiding future observers. And as she pieced together the information, she noted patterns of inheritance disputes, secret rendezvous, hidden rivalries, and carefully orchestrated deceptions, all woven into the very structure of the manor and its grounds, while the whispering, faint yet insistent, seemed to reinforce her understanding, suggesting that the house itself was both witness and participant in the unfolding story. And Miss Marple, calm, patient, and precise, began to create a mental map linking the attic's discoveries to previously uncovered letters, keys, locket, garden markings, and hidden compartments, realizing that even the smallest detail, the angle of a shadow, the tilt of a trunk lid, the subtle smudge on a letter, could illuminate the intentions, fears, and motives of those who had acted in secrecy. And as she carefully replaced the items in their proper order, noting their significance and potential connections, she felt a growing clarity, a sense that the complex network of secrets, intentions, and hidden truths was slowly revealing itself, while outside, the village remained quiet, unaware that within the walls of the whispering chimney, the past, present, and future were converging in a tapestry of mystery. And Miss Marple, poised and thoughtful, prepared herself to follow the next thread, knowing that patience, observation, and careful interpretation would ultimately expose the full story behind the manor, its inhabitants, and the secrets they had preserved for generations. And with the fading light casting long, dramatic shadows across the attic floor, she understood that every discovery brought her closer to unraveling the complete narrative, connecting the hidden messages, subtle manipulations, and carefully concealed objects that had shaped the whispering chimney's intricate history, ensuring that no clue, no whisper, and no detail would remain overlooked as she pursued the truth with calm determination, insight, and the quiet intelligence that had guided her through so many mysteries. Chapter 13. The Hidden Ledger. Miss Marple descended from the attic with measured steps, her mind racing yet calm, the faint whispers from the chimney lingering like a soft echo in her thoughts, guiding her attention as she made her way to the library, a room lined with mahogany shelves that seemed to breathe history. And as she approached the central desk, she noticed a faint irregularity in the wood grain, a subtle groove along the underside that hinted at a concealed compartment, and with careful fingers she pressed along the edge until a small panel gave way, revealing a hidden drawer, inside which lay a dusty, leather-bound ledger. The spine cracked with age and the pages yellowed, but the contents remarkably well-preserved, filled with meticulous records, transactions, and notations that reference dates, names, and events spanning decades, while the faint scent of old ink, polished wood, and lingering fire smoke mixed in the air, creating a tangible connection to the manor's past. And as Miss Marple turned the pages, she observed the repeated mention of individuals whose names had surfaced in letters, journals, and the attic documents, forming a lattice of relationships, obligations, debts, and clandestine exchanges, some financial, others personal, all carefully coded in a style that required attentive interpretation, while the whispering seemed to guide her eyes toward patterns, sequences, and annotations that revealed more than the surface information, subtly indicating motivations, rivalries, and the measures taken to obscure or misdirect. And as she studied the entries, she realized the ledger contained references to hidden rooms, secret meetings, and items concealed in both obvious and unexpected locations, aligning perfectly with the artifacts, keys, and compartments she had already discovered, and the interplay between these elements suggested a carefully orchestrated system of concealment, communication, and influence that had been maintained for generations within the manor, reflecting not only the pride, ambition, and secrecy of its inhabitants, but also their understanding of human psychology. And Miss Marple, with her quiet, incisive intelligence, began cross-referencing the ledger with her previous observations, noting how certain dates correlated with letters, entries in journals, and movements detected in the dust. While slight inconsistencies in the ledger's writing style hinted at multiple contributors, each adding their own layer of obfuscation and protection, and in a corner of the library, a faint impression on the carpet suggested that a small object had recently been moved, leading her to discover a second, smaller ledger tucked behind the larger one, this one containing shorthand annotations, cryptic symbols, and references that seemed even more personal, reflecting emotions, grievances, and intentions not captured in the formal entries. And as she pieced together the information, she realized that the manor's inhabitants had not only preserved records for practical purposes, but had also encoded human behavior, alliances, and secret interactions within these volumes, a pattern of deliberate concealment intertwined with subtle guidance for a perceptive observer. While outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows that danced across the parquet floor, highlighting the edges of the desk, slight warping in the shelves, and subtle variations in dust accumulation, all of which Miss Marple incorporated into her mental map of the manor's hidden systems. And the whispering, faint yet persistent, seemed to emphasize the connections between seemingly trivial details: the tilt of a book, the placement of a candlestick, the order of pages in a ledger, revealing the intentionality behind actions that might appear random to an untrained eye. And as she meticulously documented her findings, cross-referencing the hidden compartments, letters, journals, keys, and artifacts from the attic, shed, and study, she began to see the larger narrative emerge, a web of secrets, manipulations, rivalries, and loyalties that span generations, orchestrated through the careful use of physical objects, written communication, and subtle psychological cues. And Miss Marple, aware of the depth and complexity of the patterns she was uncovering, felt a quiet satisfaction, recognizing that each discovery, no matter how small, contributed to a growing understanding of the manor's intricate history and the human behavior that shaped it, while simultaneously noting how the architecture, layout, and placement of objects had been designed to both conceal and reveal, offering protection to the secretive yet guidance to the observant. And she realized that the ledger, in its combination of factual entries and subtle emotional encoding, served as both a record and a key, providing insight into the motivations, fears, and intentions of those who had acted behind the manor's walls. And as she closed the volumes, gently returning them to their hidden drawer, she reflected on how the whispering chimney, its hidden compartments, letters, artifacts, and architectural cues all functioned as an integrated system, preserving memory, influencing behavior, and shaping the understanding of anyone patient enough to observe, while the village outside moved obliviously, unaware of the intricate network of secrets unfolding within the manor. And Miss Marple, poised, patient, and meticulously observant, prepared herself for the next stage of discovery, knowing that every thread she had traced, every detail she had catalogued, and every whisper she had followed was guiding her toward the ultimate revelation of truth, intention, and concealed narrative that would finally illuminate the full story of the whispering chimney, its inhabitants, and the mysteries they had carefully woven into the fabric of the manor for generations. Chapter 14. Echoes in the Library. Miss Marple returned to the library, the quiet steps on the polished floor echoing faintly in the high-ceilinged room, while the soft, persistent whisper from the chimney seemed almost to accompany her movements, a gentle guide drawing her attention to details she might otherwise overlook, and immediately her eyes began scanning the shelves, desks, and display cases, noticing the subtle layering of dust, the faint displacements of objects, and the delicate variations in the woodwork that indicated previous handling, placement, or concealment, while the afternoon light streamed through tall windows, casting sharp contrasts of shadow and highlighting even the smallest imperfections. And as she moved toward the far corner of the room, she noticed a book slightly protruding from an otherwise orderly row, its spine bearing no title, only a faintly embossed symbol, suggesting it had been placed deliberately to conceal or mark something, and with careful fingers, she pulled it forward, revealing a hidden compartment behind the shelf, just large enough to contain a thin bundle of letters, tied with faded ribbon, the edges worn and yellowed by time, and as she lifted the bundle, the whispering seemed to swell ever so slightly, as if acknowledging her discovery, urging her to examine the contents with deliberate care, and as she unfolded the letters, she recognized familiar handwriting, notes cross-referenced in the ledgers and journals she had previously uncovered, each word, date, and signature aligning with subtle details she had observed throughout the manor, from the attic to the hidden corridor, from the garden to the study, forming a complex web of secrets, motives, and concealed actions. And Miss Marple, quietly attentive, noted how the letters revealed not only financial arrangements, inheritances, and obligations, but also personal grievances, rivalries, and hidden alliances, all intricately intertwined and carefully recorded to maintain secrecy, while subtly guiding those observant enough to perceive the patterns. And alongside the letters, she discovered small objects, a silver locket, a key engraved with faint initials, and a delicate pocket watch, each artifact connected to specific events, individuals, or locations she had previously investigated, the positioning of each item seemingly deliberate, providing subtle guidance while simultaneously protecting secrets. And as she laid the items out on a nearby desk, she began to cross-reference them with her previous notes, mentally mapping their significance, noting how the placement, timing, and physical characteristics aligned with human behaviors, fears, and intentions, while the whispering from the chimney continued, a subtle, almost imperceptible presence that seemed to underscore the connections she was making. And outside, the fading sunlight cast long, angular shadows across the parquet floor, highlighting areas of dust disturbance, scratches in the wood, and slight warping in furniture placement, all contributing additional clues, while the quiet tick of the library clock provided a rhythm against which she measured the patterns and inconsistencies. And as she traced names, dates, and coded messages, she began to see the full complexity of the manor's hidden narrative, the intertwined threads of loyalty, deceit, ambition, and fear spanning generations. Each discovery reinforcing her understanding that the Whispering Chimney was not simply a building but a living, breathing repository of human behavior, carefully preserved and subtly manipulated to conceal truths while providing opportunities for revelation to the attentive observer. And as Miss Marple carefully documented her findings, noting correspondences between letters, objects, architectural features, and previously unexplored compartments, she realized that the manor itself had been designed to guide perceptive individuals toward understanding, while misleading those less attentive, and the whispering, soft yet persistent, seemed almost to encourage her to piece together the story, connecting hidden passages, obscure objects, and coded communications, revealing motives, rivalries, and concealed intentions. And as she reflected on the ledger, the attic journals, the study documents, the garden markings, and the letters she now held, she recognized that the manor's history, its carefully preserved secrets, and the human behaviors embedded within the architecture formed an intricate puzzle, one that required patience, intelligence, and a deep understanding of character to decode. And Miss Marple, calm and resolute, mapped out the interconnections, anticipating how each element might relate to the next, while outside, the village remained quiet and unsuspecting, unaware that the house's shadows, whispers, and carefully concealed objects held the key to unraveling a story spanning decades. And she understood that by following the subtle guidance of the whispering, observing minute details, and connecting disparate clues, she was moving closer than ever to fully understanding the truth behind the whispering chimney, its secrets, and the complex web of human motives that had shaped its history, ensuring that no subtlety, no artifact, and no encoded message would remain overlooked as she prepared to follow the next thread of discovery, confident that the ultimate revelation lay just ahead, waiting to be pieced together through patience, observation, and quiet, meticulous reasoning. Chapter 15: Shadows in the Conservatory. Miss Marple stepped quietly into the conservatory, the delicate scent of damp earth and withering plants mingling with the faint aroma of polished brass and aged stone, and immediately her eyes began scanning the room, noting the subtle distortions in the glass panes, the slight unevenness of the tiled floor, and the careful arrangement of pots, vases, and plant stands, each seemingly ordinary but potentially concealing layers of intention, while the whispering from the chimney above, soft yet persistent in her mind, seemed to guide her attention toward areas she might otherwise overlook, and she moved slowly along the perimeter, observing how shadows from the late afternoon sun shifted across the floor, highlighting irregularities, scratches, and faint depressions in the tile that suggested recent movement or hidden activity, and as she approached a central marble fountain, she noticed faint smudges along its edge, almost imperceptible, indicating that someone had leaned or handled objects there with great care, and nearby, a row of ceramic pots contained small folded notes, hidden behind leaves, corners tucked away from casual observation, their faint ink markings hinting at coded messages, reminders, or instructions left for someone aware of their significance, while the whispering seemed to emphasize patterns in the placement of objects, the alignment of shadows, and the direction of light, revealing subtle pathways and hidden cues throughout the conservatory. And as she bent to examine the notes, Miss Marple noticed references to specific dates, names, and events that corresponded precisely with the documents, ledgers, and journals she had discovered in the study, attic, and library, creating a network of interconnected clues that spanned the manor's rooms and grounds, each piece of information reinforcing the notion that the house itself, with its architecture, furnishings, and carefully positioned objects, functioned as an intricate instrument of concealment and revelation. And among the notes, she found small keys, each labeled with faint, almost illegible initials, suggesting connections to previously observed locks, drawers, and compartments, while faint scratches on the wooden plant stands indicated the repeated movement of objects, deliberate yet disguised as ordinary activity. And as she carefully mapped these connections mentally, she realized that the conservatory had been designed not only to house plants, but to serve as a central point for communication and hidden exchanges, the arrangement of flora, furniture, and artifacts acting as silent signposts for those who knew how to interpret them, while the whispering in her mind grew slightly clearer, drawing her attention to subtle inconsistencies in the soil, tiny indentations along the edges of the fountain, and the slight warp in a wooden panel, all suggesting hidden cavities or objects yet to be discovered. And Miss Marple, serene yet intensely observant, documented each detail, cross-referencing them with her prior findings. The journal's coded entries, the letter's cryptic annotations, the ledger's numerical patterns, and the attic's preserved artifacts, recognizing that the combined evidence formed a coherent picture of human behavior, secrecy, and intent, while simultaneously preserving layers of deception for those less attentive. And as she adjusted a slightly crooked pot, a faint glint beneath it caught her eye, revealing a tiny metal box, worn and almost hidden, containing an assortment of delicate items, a torn fragment of a letter, a locket with a miniature portrait, and a small key she had not yet encountered, each object providing a new piece of the intricate puzzle of motives, alliances, and secrets within the whispering chimney. And outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long, dramatic shadows that shifted with every cloud, providing natural illumination that accentuated subtle details, while inside, Miss Marple moved methodically, considering not only the physical layout and artifacts but also the likely intentions and emotions of the individuals who had placed them, understanding that every placement, every alteration, every hidden note, and every subtle marking reflected layers of strategy, fear, pride, and ambition, and she realized that by observing these minute but significant cues, she could reconstruct the sequences of events, the relationships between people, and the concealed actions that had shaped the manor's history, while the whispering seemed to affirm her reasoning, encouraging careful interpretation of even the smallest traces, the faintest smudge, and the most obscure artifact, all contributing to a holistic understanding of the mystery, and Miss Marple, calm and deliberate, prepared to follow the next lead, aware that each discovery brought her closer to unmasking the truths hidden within the manor, the intentions of its inhabitants, and the full story encoded within the whispering chimney's rooms, corridors, gardens, and hidden compartments, ensuring that nothing would remain overlooked as she advanced toward the ultimate revelation of motive, opportunity, and human behavior that had orchestrated the events leading to the current mysteries, while the conservatory, with its shadows, light, plants, and carefully arranged objects, quietly bore witness to the unfolding investigation, a silent partner in the methodical uncovering of decades of secrets, manipulations, and concealed truths. Chapter 16. The Garden Path Revelation. Miss Marple stepped onto the winding garden path, the late afternoon sun casting long, shifting shadows across the carefully tended flower beds, and immediately she noted the subtle irregularities in the gravel, slight depressions suggesting hurried footsteps or concealed objects, while the whispering from the chimney, soft yet insistent, seemed to follow her even outside the manor walls, guiding her attention toward areas that might otherwise appear mundane, and as she moved along the path, she observed how the placement of plants, small statues, and garden ornaments created natural lines of sight, hiding certain spots while highlighting others, and her keen eyes caught a faint glimmer beneath a low-lying shrub, a small metallic object partially buried in the soil, which upon closer inspection proved to be a miniature key, tarnished with age but intact, immediately connecting in her mind to the ledger entries, letters, and hidden compartments she had discovered within the manor, and she continued, noticing the subtle scuff marks along the edge of the stone edging, suggesting that someone had repeatedly leaned, knelt, or shifted objects, each movement leaving a trace for the perceptive observer, while the whispering seemed almost to emphasize these cues, hinting at hidden relationships between the physical space, human actions, and long-preserved secrets. And as she followed the winding path toward a secluded corner of the garden, where ivy climbed the walls of the conservatory, she noticed a loose paving stone, slightly raised, its displacement subtle enough to escape casual notice, but deliberate in placement, and upon lifting it, she discovered a small wooden box, weathered yet preserved, containing letters, a fragment of a torn map, and a small vial with traces of powdered substance, each artifact suggesting clandestine meetings, secret exchanges, or preserved evidence intended to remain undiscovered, and Miss Marple, with her characteristic calm and meticulous attention to detail, began to correlate these findings with the clues she had gathered from the attic, library, and conservatory, noting how the placement of objects, subtle markings, and encoded letters created a continuous narrative, a hidden system of communication and concealment that had been carefully maintained over decades, while the surrounding garden, with its winding paths, ornamental hedges, and shadowed corners, acted as both a stage and a shield, preserving secrets, while offering subtle signals to those observant enough to detect them. And as she traced the patterns in the placement of keys, notes, and hidden containers, she realized that the garden itself had been designed as an integral part of the manor's secretive network, connecting rooms, hidden corridors, and outdoor spaces in a coherent system of clues, each item deliberately positioned to reveal or obscure information according to the observer's perceptiveness, and the faint scuff marks, footprints, and disturbed soil confirmed that someone had recently navigated these hidden pathways, moving deliberately to check, adjust, or retrieve items, and the whispering, soft yet persistent, seemed to validate her observations, emphasizing the connections between the artifacts, paths, and concealed intentions, while outside, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that accentuated subtle details, slight warps in paving stones, delicate scratches on garden ornaments, faint indentations in flower beds, all forming a network of clues that Miss Marple incorporated into her growing understanding of the manor's layered mysteries. And as she carefully documented each discovery, mentally mapping the relationships between letters, ledgers, journals, keys, hidden compartments, and now garden artifacts, she recognized the complexity and foresight involved in orchestrating such an intricate system of concealment, manipulation, and communication, while simultaneously preserving secrecy and guiding the observant toward understanding. And Miss Marple, serene yet intensely focused, pieced together a narrative connecting generations of hidden rivalries, alliances, motives, and actions, all encoded through objects, placement, and subtle architectural or natural cues. And as she returned the box to its hidden location beneath the paving stone, she reflected on how the interplay between the garden's design, the manor's interior spaces, and the behavior of its inhabitants formed a comprehensive map of human intentions, revealing both the meticulous planning and the small, unplanned details that could ultimately expose truths. And the whispering seemed almost to whisper in approval, guiding her next steps, while the fading light deepened the shadows, creating a visual metaphor for the concealed layers of truth, intention, and secrecy that she was slowly unraveling. And Miss Marple, aware of the importance of patience, observation, and careful interpretation, prepared to follow the next thread in the manor's intricate web of mystery, confident that the combined clues from the attic, library, conservatory, and garden path would soon converge to illuminate the full story hidden within the whispering chimney, its inhabitants, and the generations of secrets that had shaped its history, ensuring that every trace, mark, and whisper would contribute to the ultimate revelation. Chapter 17: The Forgotten Study. Miss Marple moved through the manor with quiet deliberation, her footsteps barely audible on the worn carpets as she approached the forgotten study at the end of the east wing, a room long neglected, its windows draped with dust-laden curtains, and immediately the faint aroma of aged paper, leather bindings, and lingering smoke enveloped her senses, while the whispering from the chimney seemed to intensify, urging her to notice subtle irregularities, the slight tilt of the bookshelves, a barely perceptible scratch on the wooden floor, and the faint shadow of an object displaced recently, all pointing to hidden activity. And as she opened the door, the study revealed a wealth of forgotten items, stacks of journals, ledgers, and letters that had clearly not been touched in decades, yet arranged in such a way that someone, at some point, had methodically reviewed and repositioned them, suggesting deliberate intent, while Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the faint indentations in the leather-bound chairs, the careful placement of inkwells and quills, and the small scratches on the desktop, all forming subtle clues to recent manipulation. And as she began inspecting the journals, she discovered cross-references to previous findings, entries matching the hidden ledgers, letters from the conservatory, and notes from the garden path, each revealing a complex web of relationships, secret arrangements, and minor rivalries that had been carefully maintained and recorded, while miniature marks in the margins, almost imperceptible, indicated the author's emotional state, providing subtle insight into intentions, frustrations, and fears. And Miss Marple, connecting these observations with the artifacts, keys, and compartments she had previously uncovered, realized that the study had been a central hub for coordinating hidden activities throughout the manor, a place where plans were recorded, instructions were encoded, and human behavior was subtly orchestrated, while the whispering seemed to guide her attention toward a particular bookshelf, its lower shelf slightly misaligned, suggesting a concealed compartment. And as she pressed along the edge, a panel clicked open, revealing a shallow box containing a series of meticulously folded documents, each coded with symbols, shorthand, and dates corresponding to significant events. And as she unfolded the first sheet, she recognized patterns that connected financial dealings, personal correspondences, and secret rendezvous, while the subtle placement of objects in the room, The tilt of a painting, the position of a small globe, the arrangement of candles, appeared to provide visual cues designed to complement the written records, leading the observer toward understanding while keeping the casual visitor oblivious. And outside, the dying afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows that accentuated the room's hidden features, while Miss Marple meticulously documented each discovery, noting minute details such as ink smudges, creases in paper, and slight abrasions on the desk, all of which revealed human interaction, care, and intent, and she began cross-referencing the documents with previous clues. The ledgers in the library, letters from the conservatory, keys from the garden, and hidden artifacts in the attic, constructing a cohesive timeline and mapping intricate relationships, realizing that the manor's architecture, furnishings, and hidden compartments had been carefully designed to store not only physical items, but layers of human intention, secrecy, and guidance, while the whispering, subtle yet persistent, emphasized the interconnections between the room's contents, the manor's layout, and the behaviors of past and present inhabitants, suggesting patterns and connections that could otherwise remain unnoticed. And Miss Marple, calm and methodical, pieced together how rivalries, alliances, hidden motivations, and deliberate concealments had shaped both the manor's physical structure and the human stories entwined with it, while the faint scent of old ink and leather reminded her of the passage of time and the careful preservation of secrets. And as she gently replaced the documents in their hidden compartment, she reflected on the complexity of the system she was unraveling, understanding that each object, mark, and document contributed to a vast network of human behaviors, each layer of secrecy providing insight into intentions, mistakes, and the subtle art of concealment, while the whispering seemed almost to guide her next steps, emphasizing that even minor details, dust patterns, misplaced objects, or faint scratches could hold the key to understanding the manor's layered narrative. And Miss Marple, ever patient, knew that these observations would converge, in due time, to illuminate the entire story of the Whispering Chimney, the motives behind past actions, and the intricate web of secrets that had defined the manor's long, enigmatic history. Chapter 18. The Attic's Silent Secrets. Miss Marple ascended the narrow, creaking staircase to the attic, the air growing cooler and heavier with each step, carrying the faint scent of aged timber, mothballs, and long-forgotten linens, while the whispering from the chimney seemed almost louder here, echoing softly in her mind, urging her to observe the smallest details, the subtle shifts in light, and the faintest impressions left by human presence. And as she pushed open the attic door, a dim shaft of sunlight revealed stacks of trunks, boxes, and parcels, each layer covered in dust and cobwebs, yet arranged with an underlying order that suggested careful handling by someone aware of the attic secrets. And immediately, Miss Marple's eyes began scanning every surface, noting scratches on the floorboards, slight indentations beneath the trunks, and the delicate, almost imperceptible displacement of objects that hinted at prior examination or concealment, while the whispering seemed to draw her attention to a corner, where a small, unassuming chest sat slightly apart from the others, its surface marked by faint initials and worn edges, suggesting repeated contact. And as she approached it, she observed a thin layer of dust disrupted in a pattern that appeared intentional, perhaps a subtle signal pointing to the chest's importance. And with careful fingers, she opened it to reveal a collection of letters, photographs, and small artifacts, each item meticulously wrapped or folded, indicating both secrecy and a desire for preservation, while the handwriting in the letters revealed familiar correspondences to the journals and ledgers she had uncovered in the library and study, and the photographs depicted moments previously mentioned in documents, meetings, gatherings, and seemingly trivial interactions that now held profound significance in reconstructing the manor's hidden history. And among the artifacts, she found a delicate silver locket, a tiny key marked with a barely legible symbol, and a folded piece of parchment containing a ciphered note, all pointing toward long-hidden communications and secret exchanges, while the whispering, soft but insistent, guided her attention to an overlooked trunk beneath a tattered quilt, where another set of letters and artifacts awaited discovery, each item reinforcing the patterns she had begun to trace across the manor, connecting the attic, the library, the conservatory, and the garden into a unified network of human behavior, concealed motives and deliberate deception. And as Miss Marple carefully unfolded and examined the letters, she realized that the attic had been used not only to store physical evidence, but as a quiet archive of intentions, conflicts, and subtle manipulations, preserved across decades to maintain secrecy, while providing clues for the observant. And the faint scuff marks on the wooden floorboards, the misaligned planks, and the slight warping in the walls suggested routes of access, previous intrusions, or movements designed to hide or reveal specific items at specific times, while outside, the fading sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting elongated shadows that accentuated subtle details, tiny tears in paper edges, slight discolorations, and fine dust patterns, all contributing to the unfolding puzzle. And Miss Marple, calm and methodical, cross-referenced the attic's findings with those of the garden, conservatory, and study, connecting objects, letters, and notes to trace human motives, actions, and concealed communications, recognizing how carefully orchestrated these layers of secrecy had been, how some artifacts had been placed to mislead, others to guide, and yet all were part of a larger story embedded within the manor's architecture and history, while the whispering seemed almost to respond to her deductions, emphasizing subtle correspondences, patterns of concealment, and human tendencies that would otherwise remain unnoticed. And as she documented every artifact, every smudge, every faint impression, she understood the breadth of the conspiracy, the intertwining of rivalry, loyalty, ambition, and fear, and the way the manor's spaces, the attic, the library, the study, the conservatory, and the garden, had all been utilized to preserve, conceal, and reveal, ensuring that only a careful observer could reconstruct the truth. And Miss Marple, with patience and clarity, felt that the ultimate revelation was approaching, the final connections falling into place as she pieced together decades of secrecy, human error, and subtle intention, confident that the whispering chimney's hidden narrative was on the verge of full illumination, and that every whisper, shadow, and artifact she had encountered would contribute to unveiling the entire story in due course, leaving no secret unturned and no subtlety overlooked. Chapter 19: The Hidden Correspondence. Miss Marple carefully descended from the attic, the echoes of her footsteps muted against the worn carpet of the hallway, while the whispering from the chimney seemed to accompany her, drawing her attention to subtle details she had previously overlooked. The faint scratches along the doorframe, the almost imperceptible tilt of a painting, and the delicate dust patterns on the sill that suggested recent movement. And as she approached the study once more, she noticed a small envelope tucked behind a ledger on the highest shelf, partially hidden from casual view, and immediately she recognized that the positioning was deliberate, a secret left for someone observant, while the content of the envelope, a series of folded letters and postcards, revealed a network of hidden correspondence spanning months, even years, connecting the manor's inhabitants and visitors in ways that had been carefully concealed from casual observation. And each letter was annotated with cryptic markings, tiny symbols, and codes that initially appeared meaningless, but, when cross-referenced with previous journals, ledgers, and artifacts she had discovered, began to reveal a clear pattern of secret meetings, exchanged information, and calculated concealments, while the whispering seemed to grow more insistent, almost encouraging her to pay attention to the smallest details, subtle punctuation, and the peculiar way some words had been underlined or emphasized. And as she spread the letters out across the desk, she noticed that the handwriting, paper type, and ink color varied subtly, suggesting multiple authors, some familiar, others anonymous, all carefully orchestrating the communication while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. And even the placement of the letters on the desk, their folding patterns and slight creases indicated intentional signaling, guiding a perceptive observer toward understanding, while the faint smell of aged paper, ink, and wax from old seals lent an almost tactile sense of connection to the past. as if the manor itself was whispering its secrets, and Miss Marple, with her calm and methodical nature, began decoding each symbol, marking each connection, and reconstructing the hidden narrative embedded within the correspondence, connecting it to the concealed compartments she had discovered in the conservatory and attic, the artifacts in the garden, and the ledgers in the library, recognizing that every object, letter, and marking contributed to a larger, carefully constructed web of human behavior, secrecy, and manipulation, while the whispering seemed to emphasize her observations, nudging her to notice even the subtlest of details, the slight smudge on a signature, the faint indentation on a corner, or the precise alignment of stamps and postmarks, all of which revealed patterns of movement, intention, and hidden interaction. And as she worked, Miss Marple realized that these hidden correspondences not only documented the actions of those involved but also served as instruments of control, signaling, and subtle intimidation, ensuring that only those perceptive enough could interpret the truth, while everyone else remained unaware of the delicate, interconnected system operating beneath the manor's seemingly serene exterior. And each discovery reinforced the notion that the Whispering Chimney was not merely a structure but an elaborate network of human intention, carefully concealed interactions, and intricate planning, with each room, corridor, artifact, and hidden object playing a deliberate role in maintaining secrecy, conveying messages, and protecting the manipulations of the past. And as Miss Marple carefully placed each letter in chronological order, she began to see not only the sequence of actions, but also the psychological interplay, rivalries, grudges, loyalties, ambitions, and fears, all encoded within the careful placement of words, objects, and hidden compartments, while the whispering seemed almost to guide her next step, emphasizing the connections between past decisions, concealed actions, and the patterns of human behavior that had persisted over time. And by meticulously mapping these relationships, Miss Marple understood how the ultimate revelation was carefully concealed in plain sight, scattered across multiple layers of the manor, and yet fully reconstructible by someone with patience, observation, and insight. And she felt, with quiet certainty, that the final pieces of the puzzle were within reach, and that soon the entire narrative, from hidden motives to subtle manipulations, would be fully illuminated, leaving no secret unexposed and no action unexplained within the intricate web that the Whispering Chimney had harbored for decades. Chapter 20. The Final Unveiling. Miss Marple stood in the grand hall of the Whispering Chimney, the evening light casting long, wavering shadows across the polished floors and ornate walls, her eyes sweeping every corner, every shadow, every detail she had so carefully catalogued over the past weeks, while the whispering, faint yet persistent, seemed to echo through the manor one final time, guiding her attention to the culmination of all the threads she had painstakingly uncovered, from the attic's hidden artifacts to the garden's concealed objects, from the study's cryptic letters to the subtle markings in the conservatory, all forming a vast, interwoven tapestry of human behavior, secrecy, and motive. And as she reflected on each discovery, each scuff, each misaligned book, each faint indentation, she understood how the manor itself had been a silent witness, a repository of generations of hidden actions, concealed messages, and carefully orchestrated deceptions, while the family portraits, draped in the soft, golden light of dusk, seemed almost to nod in acknowledgement of the truths she was about to reveal. And Miss Marple, calm, deliberate, and unhurried, began recounting the narrative, each revelation building upon the previous, linking clues from the garden path to the attic, the hidden compartments to the cryptic letters, the coded ledgers to the faint scratches on the floorboards. And the whispering seemed almost to lend voice to her deductions, emphasizing the meticulous chain of human actions and intentions that had led to the recent disturbances. And as she explained the motives, rivalries, and alliances, the hidden communications, the carefully manipulated objects, and the subtle psychological pressures exerted over time, she demonstrated how each seemingly trivial detail, dust patterns, misaligned objects, faint marks, and folded letters, played a crucial role in the intricate web of secrecy, deception, and revelation. And she revealed the precise sequence of events, the concealed meetings, and the decisions that had escalated misunderstandings into threats, showing how human nature, with its flaws, fears, ambitions, and attachments, had guided every action, while the Whispering Chimney itself, with its architectural nuances, hidden spaces, and carefully preserved artifacts, had acted both as a protector of secrets and as a silent informant to the observant. And as Miss Marple continued, her calm voice drawing attention to subtle connections, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, illuminating relationships, revealing long-hidden grudges, and exposing carefully concealed intentions that had gone unnoticed by everyone else, and the manor, in its hushed grandeur, seemed to breathe as if acknowledging the final unraveling of its mysteries, while the whispering softened, almost as if satisfied that the truth had been restored to its proper place. And as she concluded, each artifact, letter, scuff mark, and hidden compartment now made sense, forming a cohesive, interlocking narrative that left no question unanswered, no secret unexamined, and no subtlety overlooked, and the previously perplexing disturbances, mysterious movements, and faint whispers that had haunted the manor over weeks now resolved into a clear story of human emotion, cunning, and misjudgment, intertwined with the careful orchestration of physical space, objects, and concealed communications. And Miss Marple, serene yet triumphant, reflected on the quiet genius of human perception, observation, and patience, knowing that while others had rushed to judgment, overlooked small details, or relied solely on appearances, it was careful observation, understanding of human nature, and attention to the minutiae that had allowed her to reconstruct the full truth. And as she placed the final letter back into its hidden compartment, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the manor in a warm, soft glow, shadows stretching and blending, light dancing over the polished floors and ornate walls, emphasizing the continuity of the manor's secrets now revealed and the peace restored. And while the villagers would continue their lives, unaware of the intricate web of motives and actions that had shaped events, Miss Marple quietly understood that the Whispering Chimney had held its secrets for decades, but through careful observation, intuition, and the patient unraveling of subtle clues, the full narrative had been brought to light, ensuring that every hidden thread, every whispered hint, and every overlooked detail had contributed to the ultimate revelation. And with a calm, satisfied smile, Miss Marple stepped away from the hall, leaving the manor both changed and unchanged, its secrets unveiled yet preserved in memory, and the whispering, soft and fading, seemed finally to rest, as the story of the Whispering Chimney and its generations of concealed truths reached its rightful conclusion.